Are you thinking about living in White Lake or Waterford, Michigan, but you're torn on which one is better? I highly suggest you stick around because what I'm about to say will help with your decision. When we compare these two areas side by side, or even take a gander at Google Maps, it may seem like they are one and the same with a different name. That rhymes. But the truth is, they are very different from one another, and that comes from someone who lived in the White Lake area. If you're new here, my name is Andrew McManaman. I am a Michigan realtor that helps people relocate from all over the place to the fine state of Michigan, and I am happy to be your go-to resource. So Waterford or White Lake? White Lake or Waterford? Which one is better for you? All this information I'm about to shove in your face for both of these areas will answer that question and then some from overall feel, my personal experiences having lived in the area, city rankings, schools, cost of living, property taxes, things to do, as well as attractions. But before I jump into all the nitty gritty, I want to go over the locations themselves to help give you a better feel of the areas. White Lake, Michigan, for those of you that don't know, is a charter township that is located in Oakland County. It's 37.2 square miles in size. 3.5 square miles of that is water, with a population of around 32,000 people, which is about 860 people per square mile. Waterford is also a charter township too, located in Oakland County, that is 35.3 square miles in size, 4 square miles of that being water, with a population of around 73,000 people, which is around 2,067 people per square mile. I know data and statistics is so boring, but good lord, that is a huge difference between the two areas already. Niche.com says White Lake is more of that suburban-rural mix feeling, while Waterford is sparse suburban. I don't know if I'd say Waterford is sparse, but based on a lot of the areas in Metro Detroit, I'd say that holds pretty true actually. When looking at a map, these two townships have sections within them that will help you decide where you'd want to actually be situated. White Lake, for example, is actually a little more consistent throughout, opposed to Waterford. You have the M59 corridor sort of kind of cutting right through it, going east to west. On the south side, it's more lake heavy, a little busier, but whereas north of M59 in White Lake, it's a little more rural and residential. Waterford, on the other hand, is part of the Four Towns community, which I made an interesting video about that I'll link in the description. On the west side, it feels like an extension of White Lake. On the most northern part near Lake Oakland, you're on the border of Independence Charter Township, which is home to Clarkston. Then southeast of Dixie Highway, you start tiptoeing into Pontiac a little bit. So the area wears quite a few hats, and with that many hats comes a ridiculous range in home prices, which I'll touch on later, of course. Going off location a little more and into the overall feel, these two areas are pretty similar to one another in that aspect, as they both don't have a designated downtown area. They just have the M59 corridor that extends through and has all the offerings that are slapped on either side of it, giving you a variety without that small town feel, which may or may not be a deal breaker to some of you. What's cool about these two areas is you can really cater to what you want in a location sense. Do you want to live on a lake and get that waterfront community feeling? Then that checks the box. Do you want to have a little more space in a sparse suburban area without you sneezing and your neighbor saying bless you because you practically share the same wall? These areas have that too. And if you're situated closer to the M59 corridor, you get to have that busier feeling. You may even hear a honk or two that reminds you of that metro area you lived in once. Nostalgic. These areas aren't overly community-based, aside from the events the schools, parks, or local businesses come together to create. Another aspect I want to throw in here is city and area rankings. Not only is the data pulled together from real residents who live and have lived in the area, it gives you a well-rounded idea about the area, and after the fact, I'll share my personal experiences as someone who was a resident. Waterford was ranked an overall grade of a B+ by Niche.com, which accounted for public schools, houses, good for families, jobs, cost of living, outdoor activities, crime and safety, nightlife, diversity, weather, health and fitness, as well as the commute. Waterford also ranks number 78 of 338 most diverse suburbs in Michigan, number 89 of 338 best suburbs for young professionals in Michigan, and number 148 of 804 best places for young professionals in Michigan, and I'll tell you exactly why that is in a future point. White Lake, on the other hand, also ranks a B+ overall based on all the factors I listed earlier, and based on this Niche.com data, White Lake schools are better. White Lake is better for families. It has a higher cost of living compared to Waterford. The crime is less. The nightlife is worse. The diversity is worse. The weather is the same. the health and fitness is worse, and the commute is also worse. White Lake also ranks number 133 of 336 suburbs with the best public schools in Michigan, number 156 of 337 best suburbs to raise a family in Michigan, and number 168 of 338 best suburbs to live in Michigan. So again, this gives you some more insight on how these two areas that seem so similar are actually very different. When talking about the schools in each township, White Lake Township has 5 school districts within it: Clarkston, Holly, Huron Valley, Walled Lake, and Waterford. And Huron Valley covers the majority of it, which has Milford High School, which is ranked number 52 in Michigan. Waterford, on the other hand, has 3 separate public school districts: Waterford, Clarkston, and Pontiac, with Waterford Kettering High School. And as you can see, there is some overlap to these school districts from White Lake to Waterford, which is something to keep in mind when looking at the property tax aspect that I will touch on later, of course. I'll be sure to link some school district information in the description too to help you make the best decision possible. As far as my personal experiences go in each of these communities, as someone who lived in White Lake for about a year and a half, full disclaimer, I didn't move due to any issues with White Lake. It was just where life took me at the time. I was within the section of White Lake that I called Lake Community, where neighbors around the lake were pretty close-knit and willing to always help. Being located on the south side of the township, it had more of that Commerce Township feeling, which I made a video for, and I'll link that in the description too, as well as a video about buying the house in White Lake in my experience, and a White Lake tour video I also made for some further insight. I can't say I had any complaints aside from the area not being as walkable as I wanted, and the lake I was on having its own issues in itself. White Lake as a whole had enough offerings for me. Everything was very close together, from restaurants, grocery stores, the banks, and everything you'd really need. I did find myself at times heading into Waterford for additional options after I ran through all the White Lake ones. While living there, it was clear that the infrastructure wasn't all that suited to be able to cater to all the residents that were piling in there. And I remember when I left is when a lot more roundabouts were being made, because that was once a small rural town is now having an influx of traffic to where the stoplights require a little bit more patience. Waterford, on the other hand, has a lot more people, of course, like I mentioned before, but I feel like the layout of the area has more breathing room for more residents, and I'll touch more on my experiences when it comes to things to do and attractions in the area, but I also like the cost of living too. Switching gears to home prices, can you guess which area is more expensive? I'll give you a hint. It starts with a W. Taking a look at the chart provided by the multiple listing service, it shows the average sale price over the last 3 years, with White Lake in green and Waterford in blue. As you can see, Waterford clocks in at almost $279,000, while White Lake is at $397,000. White Lake has had a few new construction communities pop up in the area, like Trailsize Meadow, it's right off of Elizabeth Lake Road, as well as Preserve at Hidden Lake, which has helped increase that average price a little bit, while Waterford has had the Lake Point community off of Cass Lake Road too. White Lake it's been booming, and it's been really interesting to see. The home that I was in on the lake was just under 1,000 square feet with 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a garage that sold for $270,000 back in 2021, and it's well over $300,000 now. And that's one of the cool things with these areas is there's still a lot of those small cottages situated on lakes throughout these areas that you can still get your hands on for less than $500,000, then throw money into them with renovations and just get instant equity. And that's the cool part. As several cottages have made that transition, that's resulted in them being worth anywhere from like $600,000 to well over $1 million. And referring back to when I read off the rankings for Waterford and it being about the young professionals, that's accurate, because this is one of the few communities in Metro Detroit where first-time homebuyers can actually get a home that is livable, move-in ready, and actually has space. You can get 2 to 3 bedroom homes with 2 bathrooms, a basement, and a garage for under $300,000, whereas most communities have 2 to 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and either a garage or a basement, and chances are the layouts or rooms in the houses are just too small for a queen or king bed. And I say that from experience as someone who has searched in that price range for clients every single day. It comes down to, yeah, you can get in an overly desirable area and squeeze everything you own in the Tupperware container that you call a home, Or you can come to places like White Lake and Waterford where they aren't the most top of mind communities. You can actually feel like you can grow into the home for years and years instead of growing out in a year in a smaller one. Speaking of costs, let's chat about property taxes. Whip out a pen and paper because I'm about to be throwing a lot of numbers your way. I know it's not the most interesting thing possible, but when it comes to saving money, it's something to perk your ears about. So starting with White Lake Township, we have Clarkston Community Schools at a millage rate of 33.6448, Holly Schools with 35.1448, Huron Valley at 34.5352, Walled Lake at 31.2417, and Waterford Schools at 33.3948. In Waterford Township, Clarkston schools have a millage rate of 36.3741, Pontiac schools are 32.1721, and Waterford schools are 36.1241. So with school districts that overlapped, Clarkston schools in White Lake instead of Waterford saves you 2.7 mils, and Waterford schools in White Lake save about 2.7 mils. It may not seem like too much, but you really need to see that equation to see your savings. I typically take 50% of the list price, which would be more accurate to what you'll pay over using their taxable value or old state equalized values. So if the home is $300,000, let's just say, take 50%, which is $150,000, and multiply it by one of the millage rates I listed earlier, and divide it by 1,000, and that will be your yearly property tax estimate for when your property taxes uncap a year after ownership and the home's value is reassessed. There are some savings to be had, to say the least, and there's a lot to property taxes, and I'll link some videos that I created in the description below for you too. Now on to things to do and attractions. I saved this one for last as there's a lot of overlap since the commute time to each community is pretty minimal, and you probably won't know half the time if you're in White Lake versus Waterford when strolling down the M59 corridor, and that's okay. Sharing is caring. There's also around 55 lakes combined throughout these two areas, so there's no shortage of water fun such as fishing, kayaking, as well as everything that comes with being near or on an all sports lake too. There's Alpine Valley, a ski hill in White Lake, Highland State Recreational, which is on the border of White Lake and Highland for camping, Brentwood Golf Club and White Oaks Golf Course for all you Happy Gilmore folks out there, as well as the restaurant and entertainment options along Dixie Highway in Waterford. For me, White Lake was always more for parks and recreation and overall nature, whereas Waterford was the places where I'd go to the movies, try different restaurants, go bowling, etc. And when you look at a Google map, you can see just how much more green space there is in White Lake versus Waterford. With all that in mind, who wins, Waterford or White Lake, Michigan? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you as always for watching. If you're looking to buy, sell, invest in the wonderful state of Michigan, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to be your go-to resource always. Until next time.